So Nova in general, how did it feel? It feels great. I mean, you have high FCR, you teleport really quickly, so you're able to get around a lot quicker. And because you're closer to enemies often, you're able to pick up loot a little bit easier. Even though we still have telekinesis, sometimes you're out of range for telekinesis with other builds that have ranged attacks such as Blizzard or Frozen Orb or whatever. So being right on top kind of increases efficiency in that way a little bit. So yeah, I liked it. Got maybe 3 or 4 different variations we want to test. So the first one we're going to take a look at is we have a Tal Rasha variation. Tal Rasha actually works very well with Nova, considering you have a pure setup here where we're running the Infinity, which is a more in-game item, more expensive. We're running a lot of different facets in our different armor and weapon pieces to get extra damage as well. And then for the skill setup, we're just going like pure lightning, which would be like lightning mastery, Thunderstorm, because Thunderstorm for certain will be a synergy with Nova. They announced static field as well being a synergy, so I allocated points there. However, I'm hopeful that this won't be the case after the PTR is done, so that you can still keep Nova as a hybrid, because as it stands, having to invest 80 points is kind of too much, in my opinion. But in the meantime, this is the skill setup that we're going to run with. And then you still have, at level 99 at least, 20 extra points to put into Warmth, and you're going to need them for sure to be able to spam Nova, because this is quite a costly skill. 52 to 53 mana cost per cast. It just eats through your mana. You could also run a hybrid setup with Tal Rasha, where instead of running Infinity, you run Insight. Insight would provide a lot of mana recovery. This would mean that you don't need to invest those skill points into Warmth because you're running this weapon. And it frees up enough points so that you can hybrid. You don't necessarily have to go just pure lightning. You can run a cold lightning variant. In this case, we're running Frozen Orb in combination with Nova. Now, in this particular build, I would not probably not level Thunderstorm immediately. It'd probably be the last thing I level up. So I'd go like Nova and then my secondary Frozen Orb and then Thunderstorm. This is because in Diablo 2 Resurrected, there are a lot of immunes. Infinity can break immunes, so that kind of handles like a pure element scenario for the most part. Even with your follower dealing physical damage, it's nice to be able to deal a secondary element, which is why the hybrid here is quite nice, especially earlier in game. So the skill setup here, we're running Frozen Orb and Ice Bolt as a synergy, but the cool thing here is you don't really need to put any points into Cold Mastery. You might put 1 skill point here just to get up to level 17, but if you want to, if you don't care about your secondary dealing that 5% extra, you can just leave it without points, and you'll get this for free from your Tal Rasha's Lidless Eye, which is pretty cool. Other builds of the pure variant, you can also take a look at a non-set variation, which will deal more DPS than Tal Rasha. So the benefits of Tal Rasha, first off, it's cheap. It's still gives out a very high level of DPS. You can see here it says 13.7. It gives quite high life and mana, because there are a lot of plus mana and plus life affixes on all the Tal Rasha gear pieces. So when you apply battle orders from your call to arms, you actually get closer into the 3,000 life mark and closer up to the 15 or 1600 mana mark, which is where you would want to be, with relatively low effort. Otherwise, you don't have to put any points into energy, and you don't have to necessarily use a lot of charms to support your life and mana, which is really cool. Compare this to the non-set variant, which is also a really good build. This non-set variant deals about 20% more DPS, so yes, it has higher output. However, it has significantly lower life because we don't have as many plus life affixes. We are still getting a similar level of mana because we're using points into energy. We have to do this because we need a certain level of mana regeneration to be able to spam Nova at an acceptable level with the pure variant. Remember, again, we still have to, we have to increase our mana pool because if we didn't, our points into warmth would not be as valuable. Yeah, the maximum mana increases your mana regen, basically. Now the non-set variant, I'm going to run a Heart of the Oak for plus skills, faster cast rate, all resistance. Griffin's Eye, same deal, faster cast rate, plus skills. The minus to enemy lightning and plus the lightning skill damage is actually quite nice. Specifically the minus, the pierce, is really good for this item. Enigma, Giant Bear, for +2 all skills. Really cool thing you can do here is because Enigma gives +1 to teleport, you don't need to put points into teleport. I know I put it in there accidentally, but you can actually run and save a skill point. It's actually really good because it means you can finish your build at a slightly lower level than 99 because it's insanely hard to gain XP at these higher levels, right? So actually a big deal. Plus the strength, which means you save all of your stat points that you would have to invest into strength to be able to wear a Monarch shield. You can then invest in other things such as energy, to be able to spam Nova. Faster run walk is actually a big deal with Enigma. In playtesting, you're not really running around a lot in game, like when you're out in the world, but in town you cannot teleport. So the faster run walk on Enigma is huge. It's a big deal. So yeah, the magic find here also makes it so that even though the variant here that is non-set doesn't have as much magic find, see 229 versus the pure Tal's variant has 258 and it has room for swapping out, with an Istrun you could go up to 288, right? So even though the Tal's variant is lower DPS, you get the higher MF. And that kind of makes up for being at this lower DPS level. Plus it's cheaper, so there are a lot of advantages to Tal's. My advice here is that if you have the currency and you really love Nova, you can go up to a non-set variant and invest in all these items. However, if you don't, it's better just to work on your Tal Rasha set variant for this particular build. Most variants, I'm going to target a 105 FCR or 8 frame breakpoint. This is because going up to 200, you lose too many plus skills, you lose pierce, you lose, a lot of different things that you could put in the build that would increase your DPS. And going up to 200 FCR ends up decreasing your potential output. Plus it increases the requirements for mana spinning because you're attacking faster, so casting faster rather. So yeah, that's why we're going to sit at one breakpoint below the max, which is going to be 105 8 frames. Now I also tested a different variation where you use the Crescent Moon to get even more minus enemy lightning resistance, higher pierce, in combination with the Ormus robes. You can do this. This is still a high DPS variation. And in fact, it was comparable to the Enigma setup in terms of DPS when you're going up against capped resistance monsters. However, when you do this, you give up a ton of MF. You're basically at 0 MF almost. So it's kind of prohibitive, and it doesn't make sense to me in terms of gameplay to do this unless all you care about is killing the monsters or farming runes, something like this. It is viable, So higher pierce would be beneficial for magic resistant monsters, spectral, lightning immunes. You might kill those faster in this scenario if you're using this setup. So it's something. Pros and cons. Nova as a skill is pretty interesting. Like the first hit that either your enemy or yourself cast often puts the opposite person in hit recovery. So this makes for fairly engaging gameplay. It means you definitely want to be the one that surprises your enemy. FCR and FHR levels actually greatly matter in terms of either being able to cast or getting hit, because you're a melee to mid-range build. Even though this is a build that has a lot of AoE, you're still going up close, right? Often to kill enemies. This also makes for engaging gameplay, as repositioning at the correct or the wrong time can make or break your clear speed efficiency. Meaning little stylistic choices as you get accustomed to the build can help as you learn it. Nova is the ultimate AoE in that its attack scales with FCR. Most AoE spells have an internal cooldown or cooldown timer that gets initiated after cast. This means you benefit greatly with Nova from higher FCR breakpoints, but also benefit from not getting interrupted for a shorter time. Mana as a resource is also relevant since Nova is so costly. A build that deals 50% more damage, such as having Infinity, is kind of worthless if you don't allocate enough resource to be able to readily spam Nova. You can't take advantage of that extra headroom, right? I enjoy this trade-off and balance. It means that there are a lot of things that you have to account for in the build. To recap, Nova's mechanics definitely make gearing more interesting, as not only plus skills and facets increase DPS, FCR, FHR, and mana per second also have high value. Some of the cons. So even though I enjoy balancing mana as a resource for this build, the mana cost can be slightly prohibitive at current. Requiring upwards of 70 mana per second at about 53 mana per cast, Nova is very costly. Pure builds have enough points to spec into warmth and either mana charms or placing points into energy. However, hybrids have issues with free points to dedicate for this purpose. This really limits them to needing the Insight rune word, which feels too much of a requirement for these hybrids, especially when you don't have a call to arms to cast battle orders, meaning your mana pool is lower and you don't have as much mana regen. Reducing the mana cost by about 30% at minimum would keep mana still relevant, but not prohibitive for builds that are strapped for points, I feel. You'd have more flexibility in whether you wanted to allocate charms, stat points into energy, plus mana per kill, or use mana regen as needed. It would be healthier for the build overall because currently we use Insight without any of these, or alternatively we use Infinity with a lot of these, right? So it's really difficult. I wish there was more of a gray area in between those two. Something to note with this build, like if you get mana burned, you have a hard time trying to cast Nova because it costs so much mana. So sometimes you cannot put enemies that are right next to you in hit recovery, which means you have 0 time to teleport out. As compared to some other spells, it's a little bit more of an issue. Another con, sometimes Nova has issues with hold down button casting. This applies to both right click casting and quick cast variations. When you depress your mouse button, only one cast will activate, when really you want your character to continually be casting. I found that this happens most often when your cursor is over enemies when casting. Sometimes the enemies will move or die and then it really stops working. Often, to work around this issue, I either use force stand or I intermittently click to activate the casts, which is terrible because it's harder on your hand, it's harder on your wrists, right? Or I'll target the open ground area so that it doesn't target an enemy. However, I still worry that I'm wasting my efficiency by using these methods, and I can't help but think there would be a better way for the game to interact with my inputs, basically. Third con, Infinity feels like it increases the damage of Nova way too much. I'm seeing about a 50% to 75% increase to DPS, assuming mana is not a factor, depending on the level of resistance of the enemy, right? Just from having that on a follower. It's great to have a large increase from such a costly high-end in-game item, but when it's this large, it feels necessary. And I have a hard time seeing how the changes that are coming in 2.4 related to followers, the other, like Act 3, Act 5 followers, for example, Act 1 followers, I have a hard time seeing how these changes are going to make up for that level of DPS, in any configuration, right? So Infinity just feels too strong. On top of that, Conviction Aura, it can be a pain at times, because even with teleporting your follower to reposition him, it can take like half a second for the polling rate of Conviction Aura to apply to enemies, meaning oftentimes when you just teleport in, your first Nova won't have the Infinity debuff, which kind of wastes efficiency just because the stupid aura isn't big enough or isn't polling at the correct rate, right? So I'd really like to see like an increase to the frequency of the polling rate or an increase to the size of the Conviction Aura as a whole. That would be really nice for PvE. The single target DPS of Nova is pretty terrible. However, as aforementioned, this is not the focus of Nova. I'm hoping that changes to Thunderstorm will allow some build variations to function well and have Thunderstorm be that supporting single target DPS of the build. So Thunderstorm at current is actually pretty terrible. Even if you invest a ton of skill points in it, you can see we're up to level 42 with this particular build in skills. It's still only the frequency decreases slightly as you put more points into it, meaning it will attack quicker, but it's the rate at which it decreases per skill point is very low. And even at 42 points, even at 50 points, it's still 1.05 seconds between thunderstorm shocks. If you're putting that many points into it, it should definitely attack multiple times per second. It should, maybe do more DPS. Maybe it can hit multiple targets. I don't know, multiple times. I don't know. I'm really looking forward to seeing what they do to fix this. As far as future changes to Nova, I think it would be really cool if there was some sort of discharge mechanic with Nova to be like the more often you hit a target, you successfully cast Nova within range of enemies, it would eventually build up, and then discharge, some sort of lightning bolt or something from your character to be able to support the single target DPS of Thunderstorm if you were engaged with, say, not only single target, but single target high health enemies such as bosses or Ubers or whatever. You'd be able to deal more higher long-term DPS than you would otherwise, right? So I think that would be really cool. And it would be really engaging because it would keep you wanting to engage enemies to maintain efficiency. So like the pace of just being in combat all the time, you would benefit from that, right? And so I think that would feel really good. The best I could clear with both the non-set and the Tal Rasha Infinity setups was Players 3. I could not clear Players 5. I ended up dying a lot to immune type situations where there was in combination with mana burners a lot more often because I wasn't able to deal out enough damage to kill them quick enough. So I kind of feel like Players 3 is the maximum right now for this particular setup, and that is kind of sad. So I would like to see a little bit of an increase here, but that being said, it handles Players 1 really well. You can kill Hell Cows with the non-set variation in 4 attacks, 4 casts of Nova, 5 casts of Nova with Tal Rasha. So I definitely feel, it's in an okay spot. That being said, even though Nova's in a good place, I don't feel like Thunderstorm is close enough to where it needs to be to provide the single target DPS that this build needs to kind of make up for that lack in that area. So when you come up against Bale running, or Diablo, you kill them fairly quick with Nova and your high-end mercenary perhaps, but having a better Thunderstorm in play, a better single target in this area might be significant increase in this area might be warranted, right? So anyway, that's my verdict. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you, and take care.